letter you cite permission of NEMA to build, and you give another letter showing that at some point WERMA had given its own measurements regarding the land when you sought to build a dike. Would you explain why you believe this proves, if you like, that there was no wrongdoing on the part of Superior Homes?
Okay, thanks, Anne. I think the main question is how far is the riparian land from the riverbank, and where is the riverbank? So our surveyor has identified the riverbank in a certain place, and our construction is more than 30 metres back from that. So our view is that we're not on the riparian land, and we never have been.
Are you going to court to stop these demolitions?
Yeah, the lawyers for Superior Homes and the homeowners have joined hands, and they'll be going to court to seek an order to stop it.
Okay, but as it stands right now, come Thursday, they could be going down.
As it stands right now, but we're very confident that by Thursday it'll be a changed situation and we'll have a stay on the decision.
Okay. Dr. Odote, you've seen those two letters that I've referred to by Superior Homes. In your assessment, is that sufficient evidence that Superior Homes was not in the wrong?
Actually, I think it is sufficient evidence for a different thing. It is sufficient evidence for the lack of seriousness of our agencies responsible for regulation. Because this is 9 years after this unfortunate event, as opposed to the conversation as to whether Superior Homes were on the right or wrong, which I think for me is the second side of conversation. I think for me the more fundamental thing is NEMA and WERMA knew or should have known that this was a riparian reserve. Where were they those 9 years? For me, that's the more, and I raise this because this is not the only instance where you see government agencies failing in their duties. Then when problems arise, they say, no, it isn't me, it is that other person. So I think this is something that they should be called out on. I think for me that's the most unfortunate incident in this issue.
And those who argue that, you know, the law is the law, whenever it's applied, it's the law?
The law is the law, whenever it's applied, it's the law. But the question that we need to ask ourselves, if you are hired in this place to come and read news, you can't sleep for 9 days and now say, you know, on day 10 I have now woken up. I think this is the one thing that we can't be able to do with, and it doesn't, if they're on the wrong, it does not remove the culpability from them. But at the same time, we can't use that as an excuse for not holding government agencies accountable. Because at the end of the day, if you look at the photos of those houses, what is most unfortunate is for the innocent human beings who bought those houses 9 years ago and were led down the garden path. In my view, before we reach as to who is wrong, both by the developers and by the agencies. Because yes, the law will say that you are supposed to have checked, you are an innocent purchaser for value, but I think we must be able to ask ourselves, somebody owed them a moral obligation to stop this from happening.
Let's just see if we can take a look at those pictures, because you are saying that you hope there will be a stay order, and if we could see the pictures at the height of flooding. But the question is, you know, who wants to stay in such a house thereafter? It's not safe, clearly. Why contest it being brought down when you've seen the kind of damage that has happened, and that could still happen?
Yeah, well, what prompted this action from WERMA was when we started to build a flood defence dike. So we had our engineers design a proper dike that would keep back the water should this event happen again. And keep in mind, this event hasn't been seen on the Stony Athi River in living memory. It seems to be a one-off. But nevertheless, we decided we would invest quite a considerable sum of money in a flood defence, so that if the water ever rises to this level again, it's prevented from encroaching in the houses. So we got that designed, the engineers designed it, and our team started to build it, and then WERMA came and said, what are you doing? And we said, we're building a flood defence dike, and they said, you need to write to us and ask for permission, which we did. And then the next thing we know, they're wanting to bring our houses down.
For those who say you simply didn't do your due diligence right, that there is no way this could purely be a coincidence, and of course our audience are seeing the waters right now, that if water was meant to flow this way, then it would during a flood. What do you say to them?
Well, we did our due diligence at the start, and keep in mind we got our NEMA approval in 2006, We did our measurements in 2006. We identified the riverbank. We built well back from it, right off the riparian. So you know, we haven't moved from our story. We are not on the riparian land, and we never have been. So, you know, that's our position. Now, we've got global warming, we've got unusual rains. As a responsible developer, we've got to act on that, take it into account, and protect the people that invested in our estate. We're not running away anywhere. We've got other developments on the go. We've got Elementaita, we're starting at the coast. We've got a care home starting. So we're a responsible developer that isn't going to run away from its buyers, who we owe allegiance to. So at our cost, we're prepared to build the defence that will stop the water coming in again. That isn't to say that we agree we're in the riparian, because we're not. But from a practical point of view, we're trying to solve the problem.
What do you think of that, Doctor?
I'm smiling because the same reason that I'm unhappy about what NEMA did is the same reason why the letter from NEMA alone still raises the fundamental question that you raise. Is this on a riparian or not? And I think we need to get to the bottom of that. And I don't think the letter from NEMA on its own is extremely helpful, especially when we say that the same people who gave the authorization, because the NEMA gives authorization after you've also gotten approval from lead agencies. And those lead agencies, in my view, includes the Water Resources Authority.
And actually, the letter from NEMA says as much, I believe, in the 8th clause, that you have to have had those requisite approvals.
That's what the Environmental Management and Coordination Act requires, actually. NEMA is actually the last instance.
But when they say that as a responsible developer, we're willing to build the dikes and NEMA is stopping us, or WERMA is stopping us, how do you respond to that? You
see, Anne, the process of the EIA requires that we take preventive measures. Preventive measures before this happens. The mere fact that this has happened means that first we are telling ourselves there was a problem that we needed to have dealt with that we haven't dealt with. So I think the issue of saying we are now putting on dikes, we need to ask ourselves, are those dikes the solution to it? Because it's not every environmental degradation, every environmental threat that requires you to take corrective measures. Some of them actually requires you to do nothing to move away from that place. For example, if we are able to determine that this is a riparian reserve, if we're able to determine this is a swamp, because there have also been conversations around, look, this is a swamp, and if it is, then the ecological nature of that that ecosystem requires you not to build a dike, but essentially to save lives and to avoid greater threat by moving out of it. So I think the bigger conversation is, what is the most appropriate action? So I don't think that the statement by the property developer that we think that the dike is the solution is the end of the matter. I think the bigger issue is to find out, A, are we on a riparian or not? B, if we are, what is the most environmentally sound response for dealing with this thing? And demolition may be an option.
Maybe one of
and the dike may be an option. There may be others, and I think we need to get to the bottom of that.
Ian, you're saying that you have been in touch jointly with the lawyers representing the homeowners. When did you get in touch with them?
Our lawyers got in touch with them towards the end of last week. I arrived in the country on Thursday, and my chairman had reached out to some of the affected homeowners in my absence, and their take was, look, we're appointing a lawyer to look after our interests. So once we identified that lawyer, our lawyer got in touch with them, and they're presenting a case jointly tomorrow.
We are getting reports right now that there's no such agreement that has been made jointly by both lawyers to go to court to seek a stay.
Well, I don't want to get too much into the legal aspects of it, because I'm not a lawyer. I'm just being guided. But the leases that we issue speak of our role and responsibility having an overriding need to look after the homeowners. And the homeowners' leases speak of them cooperating with us to look after them. So it only makes sense that we present a joint situation to WERMA, because it's in nobody's interests to knock these houses down. That's a last resort. I take on board what the doctor says, but you know, it's an absolute last resort. If the houses need to get knocked down, that would be after all other considerations.
So it is your hope that you would have a joint position on the matter and not in fact what has happened. We've also separately heard even today from homeowners, some of them telling us, speaking to me in fact, saying that they're quite happy to have those houses demolished because they have seen what has happened and they're afraid it would happen again. So you have not reached a joint position.
Well, not with the homeowners, but I understand the lawyers are speaking and we're jointly suggesting that the demolition order should be suspended and we should find out whether we're on the riparian, which our position is we're not, and then we go forward from there and find a solution to any future flooding.
Let's listen to what some of those homeowners had to tell us just yesterday.
The developer assured us, because we had the same, the view of the river was a fairly good view we wanted to have. And we actually asked, are we on the river bank? Can we be affected by the river when it swells? And they told us no. We have built, and we've built in a way that the estate cannot flood. When we were buying, we assumed that all statutory bodies, WARMA, NEMA, Machakos physical planning, have approved this development. Because when you buy from a site plan. It has different houses sitting on different areas.
The water was reaching here. And I think it's because the water was coming in slowly, and by the time it hits every other room, so the levels in this room was not as high. Everything was submerged. Even this decoder, if you can see, it was just cleaned inside, dried, so that we can use it. It is a risk for you to open that fridge. It will give a funny stench. We have never used it. The compressor died. What I have to deal with is spoiled food.
As a father, as a husband, I don't feel like my family is safe. I don't feel like my family is protected. I feel my family has been exposed by all this, because when I bought into this development, I bought into a promise of security, a promise of peaceable living. But as it is right now, if it rains at night, I'm not getting that peaceable living.
We don't know as of now where we're moving to. It's not easy to find a place like this anyway. And it's not easy to just find a place you can say, this is going to be home so fast.
We thought we have bought something that is legal. Most of us, including ourselves, are on mortgages, bank mortgages. So it's really a big surprise that we're even paying so much money for nothing really, for a waterbed, for a riverbank.
When I came to the house and saw something on the wall written by Water Resource Authority, I collapsed and then became unconscious.
And they already have written remove. And it shocked me. I was like, what is this? So I asked so I introduced myself. I asked him, okay, so what's your name? What is this? And he says, we are from the Water Resources Management. We have come to do what we must do. You need to remove this house. And if you don't remove it, we are going to come and remove it. And if we remove it, it will be at your cost.
What do you have to say to these homeowners, Ian?
Well, the first thing to say is how sympathetic we are, and it must be terrible. Imagine waking up in the morning and finding that written on the side of your house. It's shocking. Absolutely shocking.
And you have no hand in that, no blame at all?
No, I don't think we've any blame in it. I mean, there was no reason for us to build near the river. You know, like, if we had foreseen this happening, we wouldn't have built the houses the way they were. But nobody saw this river coming up to this level. It's never come up to this level in living memory. So it's happened. Now we've got to say, what can we do about it? How do we work together?
Are you going to compensate these, particularly these 8 families who have to move out of these houses?
We're nowhere near compensation as yet, Anne. There's a long way to run on this. I think it would be tragic. It would probably bring me to tears to see these houses come down. I watched all these houses come up. I looked in the foundation of them as they were coming up. I sold the houses to 2 or 3 of these guys personally. So nobody's got more invested in this estate than me personally, so I don't want to see the houses come down.
But you're actually not a long way from demolition. They are ordered to vacate by this Thursday. So this is a very real reality for these families who are struggling to find where they're going to sleep by this Thursday. You do not feel that sense of responsibility to them that they ought to be compensated, if only even for the troubles that they're going through right now, having to relocate, having had some damage to their property previously?
I full responsibility to the people that spent their hard-earned money with Superior Homes, and we aren't going to walk away from that responsibility, I can assure you, and I can assure the guys that bought the homes. So we will not walk away. We're not here to walk away. So we'll stand together, we'll present our case, and I'm very confident that we're not on the riparian, and we'll get the result that we need.
Are they deserving of compensation right now?
And before I respond to your question about compensation, I think we need to ensure this conversation is not about conversation only of ownership. I heard Ian saying, you know, I feel sad for those who put their houses and we're not out to bring it down. Because you must remember, why do we regulate land use? Why is Warma doing this? Despite what they have done for 9 years. They're doing this because there's a constitutional imperative to ensure that we regulate development for the interests of safety, for the interests of public health, and for the interests of land use planning. So if all those are compromised, then sadly, those buildings must come down. So we should be asking ourselves, is there a threat to security?
And in your opinion, there is?
If you look at it, just look at those photos. If you look at those photos.
If you could bring the pictures up again.
If you look at those photos, it isn't normal occurrence. There's actually a threat. The thing we then need to determine is how serious is that threat to life, how serious is that threat to safety. Looking at it from an ordinary eye, you can see the threat. So I think it's just about quickly determining what's the likelihood of this threat recurring. If there's a likelihood of recurring, sadly, we have to bring it down. Having done so, I think the next thing must then be who is culpable. And the person who is culpable must be held accountable. And I think that's a conversation going to be between three people. It's going to be between the agencies that approved. It's going to be between the developer, sadly. So we then must be able to get to the bottom and find ourselves, is this an act of God, or is this a situation which unfortunately has become a trend in this country where we have regulations, but we ignore them. Regulations are clear. Let's not build 30 meters beyond the riparian.
Let's talk about the act of God part, because whilst these are different scenarios, in the letter that Superior Homes wrote to the regulators, you pretty much said that this is climate change and the effects of it, and that's why you wanted to put up the dike. If you were to fast forward to the issue of Solai, we heard from the you know, the dam owner that again this was an act of God, and you know, where is that line drawn with science and regulation?
I think there are three things. Number one, climate change is not an act of God.
It's an act of man.
Climate change is partly act of God, but largely it's an act of man. So that doesn't become a defense. The second is the flooding we've had this year is unprecedented, admitted. But that flooding has not just taken place in where those constructions are taking place. It's taken place across the entire country. So the question we must be asking ourselves, are the threats that they are facing exacerbated by where the construction has taken place? Is it exacerbated by disregard of rules? Is it exacerbated by bending the rules? That, I think, is where the issue turns to. I think an act of God on its own stops becoming a defense. I think the bigger question is this a riverbed? Is this a place where we should not be constructing? That's what the rules provide. I think that's what we should focus on. Based
on what you've seen in terms of the letters that Superior Homes has written, and as an environmental legal practitioner, as defined by law, is it your opinion that this was constructed on a riparian reserve, seeing the measurements that they've provided, or do you think there isn't sufficient evidence yet?
I think I can say two things. The first thing is I know for a fact that anything that is constructed within 30 meters of the riverbed would be within the riparian reserve. I think what is contested between the three agencies is it within those 30 meters or not? And I think on that, I can't say from the letters itself that Ian constructed within 30 meters or outside of 30 meters. But for me, that's where the case revolves around. The case revolves around, it's close to the riverbed. As to whether it within 30 meters or not requires us to be able to accurately assess. Unfortunately, that assessment cannot only be on the words of what Ian does. When the matter goes to court, we'll then have to have an objective person to be able to make the determination as to whether it is 30 meters or not.
Some people say, and this now for the benefit of our audience beyond those of course affected by what has happened in Greenpark. So people who are looking to, you know, to buy into houses like this, you know, early development plans, if you like, etc. And some people say there are too many laws, too many agencies around you know, the construction of houses. You have NEMA, it has to do the environmental impact assessment and audit and monitoring, establish whether the land use guidelines have been followed correctly, establish whether those patterns also are correct. Then you have the National Construction Authority, which is meant to oversee construction, to register the competent contractors and make sure that they're, you know, working accordingly. You have the WERMA, the Water Resources Authority. You have the county government. Is the legalese around putting up homes and secure homes also endangering buyers? Is there a need to harmonize laws on this issue?
I think there's huge need to be able to harmonize, and this situation is even worse because we are talking about what's called a wetland. And unfortunately for this country, there's no clarity as to which single institution is responsible for wetlands. That's why you see who has gone in, who has gone is in Warma. If you look at the regulations under which they have gone in, you struggle to find why they're the ones regulating this place, because that regulation essentially deals with regulating water resources or water use. The main activity that took place here was not water use. The main activity that took place here is actually land use and development. Warma isn't the first institution. So you actually wonder why it is Warma that is going on to say, let's bring this down. In the second instance, you have NEMA, who gave out an EIA license, is now completely quiet. You have the, I think it's Mavoko County.
Yes, county government. Yes.
You have Mavoko Municipal Authority under the Machakos County government, which essentially gives a development plan. The National Construction Authority is not even anywhere in. I think we need to reach a stage where we have a one-stop shop, where it's fairly clear for a developer, it's fairly clear for a homeowner that the person who does the approval is X. And when I have that approval, I can take it to the bank. We have a situation where you have two problems. The first one is you don't know from whom you can get the approval. Number two, you aren't even sure when that approval is given is bankable. My last point on this issue is this contestation actually between Warma and NEMA is not new. It's been going on for as long as the Environmental Management and Coordination Act has existed. There's been a contestation between NEMA and the lead agencies as to who has responsibility. And you see and
in that sense, they're dropping the ball.
Yes, when it's convenient, the buck passes here. So it isn't, and you had it even in Solai. Everybody says, it's my responsibility, it's not my responsibility. So when I know it is you who did this, and it's an opportunity for me to say you are on the wrong, then I'm quickly coming up. But that's not good for Kenyans. We need to have laws that are predictable. We need to have institutions that are coordinated.
And finally, there is, of course, the provision for arbitration in cases like this. A section of homeowners have said that whereas their lawyers have written to Superior Homes, you have not shown a willingness yet to engage in arbitration. Is that something that you're willing to do to settle this between yourselves and the homeowners out of court?
Sorry, Anne, I don't think I'm aware of this approach about arbitration. I don't recollect seeing a letter from the homeowners on that subject. You have not seen a letter from homeowners asking for arbitration on the matter? No, I don't think so. I don't think they've engaged with us at all directly, except the chairman had a meeting with one of them. But I think chiefly they've gone to the lawyer and they've asked the lawyer to handle it, which is understandable. I would do the same. You know, you've got to have somebody representing your interests. So I think that they've gone to the lawyer and that's the route that they've taken. Okay. Your final thoughts to people? First of all, let's talk about the residents of Greenpark. What is within their legal rights now, particularly for those of those 8 houses that have been earmarked for demolition?
I think first is a plea to Ian. If I was Ian, I would have a conversation with about 8 houses. Because if you have a conversation with the 8 homeowners, then you're able to be on the same side. And that same side would require you to be able to ask yourself, how do we deal with the consequential economic loss in case this gets out. Thereafter, you can then have a conversation. You can then be able to have a challenge with NEMA and have a conversation with them and find a legal solution. But to proceed going to against NEMA without dealing with the homeowners, you'll have an neat situation. That would be my advice to them. For the homeowners, I think what they need to do also for themselves, they need to be able to hold both the people who did the approval and the developers accountable, because they bought this on the strength of the legal approval, if the legal approvals exist. That, I think, is what they need to do, because at the end of the day, they eventually, the first issue they will come to is if the developers don't shoulder responsibility, they'll be in a very precarious situation, because you can't be able to get compensation from government in this instance, because government will actually be doing what is called development control. They'll be regulating the use of land, and they'll be having a legal power to do so.
And finally, to you know, Kenyans who have watched this unfold and are saying, so how do you know? How do you know where to build? How do you know what is safe to build? What do you tell them in terms of the due diligence that they need to undertake before, you know, buying into such a significant investment?
I think my advice to fellow Kenyans is please be extremely diligent. Please look at EIA reports, because if you look at EIA reports,
environmental
impact assessment reports, you will find discussions about this. I think the challenge about Greenpark, while it has appeared now, has been a subject of contestation for the last 5 years. So it's not something new. There's been contestations about whether it's a repair and reserve or not. There's been even some contestations about air pollution because of the cement factory. There's been contestations about water. So I think the important thing is for us to take environmental challenges seriously and to be able to check, so that eventually, if there are possible damages, possible challenges, you are rather safe than sorry.
All right.
Can I just say, Anne, we have reached out to the homeowners as recently as this afternoon before I was invited in your programme. We suggested a meeting this evening or at their convenience just to talk things through. So we're more than happy to meet them around the table and discuss a solution.
All right. Ian Henderson is the Managing Director of Superior Homes. Dr. Collins Odote is an environmental lawyer. And I am Anne Kiguta. Thank you for watching Monday Special.